Well, if you've been unfortunate enough to see any of my past videos, you know that I am among the biggest fans that Grand Tactician, the Civil War, has out there. It's the reason for this mediocre at best channel that somehow, against all odds and logic, is still going. I'm still of the view that Grand Tactician is a game without rival in the ACW strategy tactical genre. There's nothing else that does both levels like Grand Tactician. With it feeling like the devs are wrapping Grand Tactician and its DLC Whiskey and Lemons, I'm going to use this video to try to explain why it's still not the game that it could be. And I think that several of those things could be changed by the developers, but I think it's beyond, I'll refer to myself as a basic modder here, changing values in text files to do. Or it would take some modder modding team probably quite a bit of work to get this game where it ought to be. I don't do any of this with the high hopes that they're actually going to be taken up. I do want Grand Tactician to be the greatest of all time when it comes to ACW games. So I'm going to say it anyways. But I'm not crossing my fingers. True to form, that this video is not as well organized as it should be, and it certainly isn't going to be as brief as it could be. I guess I'll try to start with some of the bigger picture issues, and maybe we'll work down into the tactical layer. So at the kind of meta strategy level, it's my view that there are too few paths to victory, and much that appears to be important in this game is largely irrelevant. And this hurts different groups of players, or it affects different groups of players differently. So new players come to this, and they're just overwhelmed at the number of things they can do. Yeah, there's a manual, but you got to work through 150 pages, or you got to watch hours of YouTube tutorials to begin to kind of know what you're doing. New players, they're baffled why they do things that intuitively make sense. Maybe they use history and they feel like they're doing the right things, but they don't seem to materialize in the way that they would have expected, and so then they assume that they're missing something, not good enough for the game, or the game is just it's beyond them. And for the other group of players, those who actually understand how the game works, the letdown is in allowing the player to decide whether they win or lose a campaign pretty much by how many handicaps they want to impose on themselves. You pretty much can't lose unless you decide to lose, and then, what's the point? I think overall, the basic path to victory is probably okay for most players who don't really care for the grand strategy side as they care for the tactical side, fighting battles, trying to win battles. And the basic setup is probably okay. You win battles, you take territory if you're the Union. If you're the CSA, you hold as much territory as possible until the Union, taps out. And I'll just call that the kind of military path to victory in this game. I think it's okay if that's the predominant path, because I think that's what most people are here for. But there are other areas of this game that appear to matter, and yet they don't really link to the military path. And so they don't seem to matter. And so it kind of raises the question, why is this ever here? All right. The economy. The economy in this game seems to be really important. And I think new players think that. Again, you're probably worse off if you know history, and you would know that. But once you understand how the game works, you realize that it's really just the credit rating, which has... it does bear some weight on the military win condition. But there's no way to cause the economic collapse of the other side in Grand Tactician, because as much as this game presents you with a rich economic layer, it doesn't punish you or the AI with the introduction of shortages of material. And there are some exceptions to this around ships and weapons, but they are truly exceptions. And once you can get the credit rating thing working, which is really easy to do in vanilla, so much of the economy can just simply be ignored. This value here Okay, almost the entire community agrees that this value is wrong. Several of us have brought it to the developers who insist this is correct. This has been going on for years. This is kind of what you would think matters, and it's almost always wrong. The AI will almost never do anything on trade warfare, maybe a couple of raids. Meanwhile, you can blockade the entire coast of whatever the other side is, and you will probably still lose the trade warfare statistic. I believe it actually did work correctly for a couple of weeks or a couple months, like midway through its development, where it seemed to be making sense. And then with a new patch, it broke. And so maybe there's a value flipped somewhere, or we're getting this kind of in reverse. But this stat, I see so many posts on different fora. Why am I losing this? I'm doing everything right. It's broken, and the devs can't see it, and they can't fix it. And it doesn't matter. It's just a kind of meaningless stat that has this slider up here, which tells you who's winning. It's derived from the national morale, which is largely derived from the military win condition. The economy has some effect on national morale. I mean, you can see it on here. It's largely through private wealth, but it is a minuscule amount in vanilla. I think I've ramped it up 2.5 times over what it is in vanilla, and private wealth still really doesn't matter too much for affecting national morale, and other things eventually swamp it. So if you're not familiar with the national wealth, when you go to your finances, you can find out what it is for both sides. But it has a very, very minor effect on the overall campaign and the kind of military win condition. I'm also of the view that in addition to, I don't know that it would be an economic win condition, but at least make the economy feel like it matters a bit more, is that it's really missing a diplomatic win condition. I've played almost exactly 1,100 hours now, and I've never had the AI intervene in any campaign. And I've tried. I can go into the files, and I can see them, and I can set things up in a way that I can get them on the map, and I can even move them around. They're small overall, maybe 50,000 or so. They're fairly elite. I've heard from folks that when they actually do trigger, they tend to just sit off in the corner of the map and do nothing. Diplomatic intervention by one or more European powers ought to be, if not a win condition in its own right, then it ought to be a very serious challenge, like the chaos invasion from Warhammer Fantasy Battles, like a big deal that you have to care about, rather than something that can be ignored. This would add another dimension to this game. It would give both the player and the AI another avenue to pursue, but also one that they have to guard against. I don't think that it would be terribly onerous, and I think it would be interesting, and I think it would make it more realistic. As the game is currently constituted, it presents both the player and the AI with a number of ways to play the campaign. You can play towards the economy. You can try to win the economy. You can try to win the diplomatic standoff. You can try to win, on the battlefield as well. But doing great in the economy and in diplomacy barely moves the needle on you winning the campaign. And you can do absolutely nothing or like the bare minimum when it comes to the economy and nothing on diplomacy, and you can still get a very easy win condition with what's in the game in vanilla. So once you understand that, this forces the experienced player into a kind of boring campaign. You have to institute house rules, you have to make mods. In my case, I've done both, just to try to give the AI the fairest challenge. I can get to that point, and if you've watched any of the campaigns, I would say almost from late 2023 to 2024, I'm definitely getting there. However, once you get to that point, there's a final, and I cannot figure out the solution to this problem. So we can mod the AI to make better decisions. We can play with a limited number of house rules. But then we have to make similarly good decisions, or else we're going to lose to the AI, even if we do well on the battlefield. So what this means is that if you want it to be a real challenge, once you understand how the game works, rather than having multiple paths to victory, it's still just the military path, and it's a very particular military path to victory that ends up leading you to ignore large parts of the game. Again, for those who only want to do the military thing, build armies, equip them with weapons, fight battles, this isn't really a problem. But for those who like the grand strategy aspect and would like the choice for those things to matter and feel like they affect more of the campaign, make it more immersive, it's currently missing from Grand Tactician. All right, another area to focus in on, and this is at the strategic level. If you've watched any of my campaigns, you have probably heard me whine about the subsidy system. I absolutely loathe it. It's this odd system. I'm absolutely convinced that this was created to slow down the campaigns. This came out at a time when people were complaining that it was too easy to beat the AI, and so I think that this is kind of like one of those artificial speed bumps that the devs threw in there just to slow things down so you couldn't beat the AI as fast, right? That's not, well, whatever. Because what it forces you to do is to pre-allocate dollars from a budget to these general areas, and then the subsidies themselves are spent on these buildings. I've done, there's a long form tutorial I've done on different economic builds, focusing on industry, focusing on infrastructure, focusing on agriculture. The long and the short of it is that even after 36 months, plus the time it would take to save subsidies to spend on those buildings, you will end up in more debt trying to build buildings and grow your economy than if you just don't spend it all. And so the incentives of the game really are once you understand that, is just ignore it. Don't build buildings because it's going to make things worse. Railroads are closely related. For most sides, for the CSA, there's only one or two good railroads that are going to make their money back probably before the war ends, and most of the other lines really don't offer you that much. I mean, there's the transportation angle, but in terms of economic stuff, they're not going to be worth it. And so you can largely ignore it there. And then the other use, and it does matter here, is that you need subsidies for the different projects that are up here. And the amount of subsidy you can ultimately use is determined by which policies you use. All right, fine. That is what it is. But the whole building buildings and building most of the railroads, it is just this thing that people spend way too much time worrying about without realizing that the buildings are too expensive for the little benefit they give. This needs to be right-sized to actually make it worth thinking about building buildings and offering players a compelling dilemma. Otherwise, the knowledgeable player just ignores that entire side of the game. And then what was the point of including it? All right, related to subsidies, but actually different, is that a number of these policies, some of the acts and some of the projects are unnecessary because of what I mentioned earlier, that the economic and especially the diplomatic paths that you can pursue in this game really don't affect the military win condition of the campaign. One of the most misleading things, and I thought for the longest time the industrial line here was the most important, but after I did the study of buildings and the subsidies that you could get from those, it's a waste. I don't even think I usually research. I think we started off with this research, but generally I won't even bother doing that, and I'll just research other lines because they actually contribute to the win. If buildings mattered, then I would have a compelling dilemma. Pretty much right now you can safely do military, funding, maybe a little bit of ag and diplomacy in the late game, depending on whether it's Union or CSA. You can go harder for ag or for diplomacy. But for the most part, it's just military and funding, and you do the policies and acts. And a number of these acts aren't even important, like civilian warships, you safely ignore. Regulars, safely ignore. those are some of the ones that jump out. The late stage agricultural policies for the CSA are pretty bad compared to what the Union can do. Getting breadbasket and then getting Feed Europe are very powerful for getting late stage tariffs up for the Union. And unless you're role playing or you need this for trade deals in the late term, you can ignore the diplomacy side. So it's too bad because there's a lot there that could be interesting if the economy side, if building buildings mattered, and if the diplomatic angle actually brought you greater benefits, you could certainly do this. Related to this problem, though, is the knowledgeable player will know to ignore this, but the AI won't. And if you don't understand how things work, when you begin a campaign, you either begin with historical policies, and so it'll do pretty much the same thing every time. It'll take certain policies and acts in a particular order, and subsidy and tax levels and projects, blah, blah, blah. However, if you choose random, there are, I think, 5 or 6 different kind of thematic AI personalities that will randomly be rolled. And some of them pursue industrialization. Some of them pursue a diplomatic course. I don't remember if there is one that does naval as well. There's one for expansion. And why you would want an AI personality? Like, why would you expect a challenge if they're working for a diplomatic win, but there is no diplomatic win? Or if you're focusing on, you're playing against, the CSA who's going for heavy industry, well, it's not going to help them. They need to focus on other things. So it confuses and kind of overwhelms the new player, and then it contributes to the steamroll that the experienced player will get when they know to ignore these things. And if they don't know how to mod the AI to make better policies, they're pretty much choosing to have to steamroll and then severely handicap themselves for it to be interesting. And that's just not fun. All right, one of the other areas that are underdeveloped is when it comes to the Navy. And this isn't me complaining that we should have playable naval battles. That would be great. But one of the things that people will use their Navy for, is the Union to blockade the South, and then as the CSA to develop a Navy to defeat that blockade. The problem with all that is that you could blockade the South's coast, the interior. I mean, you could do it vice versa as well. And it doesn't really matter because the game does not model production shortages, and they don't carry over into battles, which is its own problem. But what it might do is affect this, what I'm sure is wrong report on the trade warfare, which doesn't really affect the basic win condition up here. And so I think one of the areas where both the newer player and the AI will go wrong with the Navy is that they will spend way more on it than they need to. And I'll still spend on the Navy for role playing, and when I play my Union campaigns, I'll try to capture forts. And as a CSA, I may or may not build cotton clads to go mess with the Union Navy, but it's for role playing. I know that it doesn't really matter, and that's ahistorical, and it's kind of illogical. But because the game doesn't really impose production penalties, it doesn't matter. That also means that things like importing weapons aren't really necessary. And if you can always produce what you need domestically, albeit with some delay or with some increase in time, you're only importing weapons for role-playing reasons, or because you just need 100,000 super well-equipped troops in the summer of '61, and you don't, right, when you know what you're doing. But that's disappointing. And then also on the naval side, there are Navy v Navy auto resolves, and that's okay. You can have naval versus fort auto resolves, and that's okay. But you don't really get how the Navy's contributed to maybe some, through the Brownwater Navy, contributed to battles on land. So, if we had these two forces here and one side had a squadron show up and lend some support, or if you had a squadron, run into, say you had a CSA squadron that was just raiding up here and they raided the first corps, There isn't that kind of interaction. I think maybe now if I turn this into a garret, I actually haven't tried this, but yeah, actually we had the Lake Pontchartrain Squadron. I don't know if we turned ourselves into a garrison, whether that would be enough, but it would still be an auto resolve, which would be okay. That would be something, but it hasn't been in the game for a long time, and I'm not sure that this actually works. And so the Navy is underpowered in the interior. The Navy is underpowered on the coast, and out here in the seas, again, without shortages that matter, there's not too much to expect. Okay, while I'm here, I mentioned it in passing, but I do want to say it before we leave. Things like ammunition shortages, lack of food, forage for horses and men, don't really seem to carry over into battles. Apparently what happens is if you're low on ammo on the campaign map, when you start the original battle, men start with all of their ammo. The only thing that happens is that if it goes overnight, you'll get resupplied less for the next day. Well, okay, but that's first of all, it's immersion breaking, and a lot of times these battles are taken care of on the first day, or they're largely decided on the first day. So by the time that the ammunition shortage could have mattered, it doesn't. Right? And if we had other things like uniform shortages or actual weapon shortages where we couldn't resupply them for reasons, right? Then we would have a decline in military efficiency, and then we'd have to worry about doing those things on the campaign. One of the other things that's odd, well, it's not odd. It's a frustration, which is that I think the devs heard, this is too easy. Why am I winning in 3 months? Blah blah blah. They never had to go down the whole Total War, and other games like this path of giving the AI buffs for being the AI, and then increasing those buffs as you quote unquote increase the difficulty. I have eliminated, or all but eliminated, all the buffs that the AI gets. And I've showed in the last few campaigns, these are darn competitive campaigns. It was really about the choices the AI made, getting them to stop pursuing all the stuff I've been talking about and just focus on the stuff that actually matters is what makes them good. But it does kind of make for linear campaigns. And they should be linear because so much that appears stuff you could be branching off into just does not matter. But in vanilla, I know that new players get frustrated a lot. Like, why are these people the AI's people are so much better than mine? Do they have buffs? And it's like, yeah, they do, and pretty significant ones at that. And I think that feels like a letdown. It breaks the immersion, and it's unnecessary, as I've showed just messing with altering values in text files. All right, one of the things I relatively recently realized is that perks, as cool as they are, okay, first of all, some of them do not work. I swear, I like the looks of this one, Pontoon Train. I've given it to different units over time. It's never perked up. I ran them over every creek and river and stream I could find, and it never moved at all. So either it doesn't work, or it's just way under counted the XP gain from doing it in vanilla, so you'll never actually move up with it. So I'm not sure that all of these actually work, but they're not terribly well balanced. There are some that are generally viewed to be superior, and the players who know. So this isn't a debate, but flying column is usually pretty good. Skilled cartographers is reasonable. BMI is reasonable. I like foot cav. Some folks like ambulance corps, and I get that one. Embedded reporters, I think, makes sense, late game, so that your troops aren't angry with their leaders. They're famous enough, right? And so there are definitely some of these that matter. The problem is that the human knows the ones that are better and which ones are broken or just really underpowered, and they'll end up selecting those. And the AI, I don't know, they seem like they always avoid the best ones and they go for the worst ones. So this contributes to the steamroller effect for knowledgeable players over time. Even if they're going to play, the less well-resourced CSA, they're not. Yeah, they're going to gain benefit from selecting the better perks, and this is true also within units for brigades. Right? There are better and worse perks for infantry, for cavalry, for artillery. This also goes for the naval aspect, although those are a little bit better, but because the Navy just is overall in unimportant sideshow in Grand Tactician, you can sweat over perks if you want for your naval units, but it really does not matter. I'll mention, I don't know where this one fits in, but I've come to the realization that for regular campaigns, that is non-Whiskey and Lemons ones, for me, I can't play the CSA anymore because the Union AI is so bad at building up forces in multiple theaters and then pushing simultaneously with them that it's so easy as the CSA, as the human player, you just move troops to where they need to be, and it's pretty much one theater at a time. You're not getting big, even when the Union is set to really out-recruit you, you're not getting big multi-theater presses at the same time where you'd be struggling to move troops around. Definitely part of the story is the tactical layer, which I haven't quite worked into, but we're about to get there. But for me, the AI kind of grand campaign is just, it's too easy, and it shouldn't be. It should be too hard if you're going to start it in Summer 61. All right, as I move to the more tactical side of Grand Tactician, talk about some of the problems. I think that it is in battles where I think most people want to be most of the time, and I think it's also where the game has struggled the most. It's not alone in games that struggle the most like this, when you only have single player options. But there are things in the game that could be done that would make it a little bit closer. And I think as the battles get closer between the human and the AI, then things on the strategic map also matter a good deal more, because frankly, you can just go out there and you can whoop every battle, and you can do very little on the campaign map and be just fine. So some of those things, the multi-unit formations, I'm of the opinion that these are pretty much one-sided benefits to players. It's also true of the single unit formations. I have never seen the AI single unit brigades go to attack column or square. When it comes to the multi-unit formations, I've seen them use double line. I've occasionally seen them refuse flanks. Yes, sometimes they march, but they never go to attack column. I've never seen them use successive lines, so I don't know why those two are in there. And I'm of the mind that they usually resort to double line, and I think it's perhaps the single biggest tactical handicap that is placed on the AI, because, and I've showed this in campaign battle after campaign battle, more often than not, what happens is the AI really reduces the firepower it has, because one brigade will line up and then one or two more will line up right behind it, and they can't shoot through their friendlies. And so rather than maximizing their firepower, and I understand there's an argument to be made for reserves and dealing with flanking issues. The AI does not respond to flanking issues usually until it's too late. But I think the AI would be better off if all of these multi-unit formations were removed and it was just single line. Or that the default was single line, and I don't know, some sort of special circumstances would make them move to double line, or give the player the option to. I'll talk about solutions to some of this stuff in a little bit, but these multi and single unit formations, I think that this is also partially true at the campaign level. I mean, we do see the AI sometimes raid, but that also seems like the human will probably make better use of scouting and guarding than the AI will, and so it contributes to the steamroll that the knowledgeable player has over the AI. Another one is that the AI will never build breastworks outside of deployment phase. It will build parapets and breastworks during the deployment phase, but it will never do the manual construction of breastworks. I reported to the devs, I think multiple times, years ago, and it just like it whatever they're not going to fix it, and they're not going to add it, and so it becomes yet another one-sided advantage for the human player. So let's see if we have a unit that has it. Well, we could just kick them out, I guess. I think that loose formation is a problem. If you look at what players have complained about as being an OP in vanilla Grand Tactician for as long as the game's been around, it's skirmishers and it's dismounted loose formation cav. Those, for some reason, people seem to have a bigger problem with skirmishers being that good. There are, in fact, buffs for those skirmishers. I think those buffs are too significant. The accuracy increase, the casualty reduction. I understand that they're not going to be good in melee, but with their numbers, they weren't going to be good in melee anyways. So I've done things on my end with my mods to significantly curtail the advantages to loose formation, particularly around the accuracy issue. I've brought that down. I think it's normally a 10% buff. I think I made it like a 1% buff. Anyways, and yeah, I think that this is one of those things. And players seem to use it more than the AI through skirmishers and dismounted loose formation cav. Oftentimes I'll see the cav dismount, which is a good start, but then they never go to loose formation. And or maybe 1 out of 4 times they also go to loose formation, and so they end up taking way more casualties than they should. All right, I want to be a little bit proactive since I've been critical for the video here, and kind of conclude on things that would be nice to see, and some of the directions I think things could go to improve this. If we could, again, mod out some of those double line and those other formations in battle, I think that one would be huge already. Anything that's going to help level the playing field without giving artificial buffs to the AI, I think is a better way to go. I would recommend scrapping the subsidy system. I've pretty much modded it out, except for projects, and even there, I've tinkered with it because there are certain things I just think are silly, and I shouldn't have to pay for the privilege of paying for other things. So I've all but eliminated it in many respects, and I would never willingly go back to vanilla, except to show how much worse it is than having the subsidy system gone. There are other ways to get competitive campaigns, and we don't need it. I've already mentioned that there needs to be right sizing of the cost versus benefits of building. Right, so if you do that, then people have an incentive to build, but when they know that they're pretty much always going to end up poorer and in no better condition for building buildings, they're not going to do it. I think the accuracy buff for skirmishers should be gone. Again, I've modded that for myself. There still should be some reduction in casualty for skirmishers, but I think it needs to be less significant. Cav skirmishers already kind of have a debuff built in, which is that they really have difficulty navigating stuff, and so I think that's fine to keep in there. But all right, that's it for that. I've noticed that in later war campaigns, which I haven't featured on the channel, the AI seems to perform better on the battlefield. It has more aggressive commanders. There are a number of different commander stats. I don't know what the secret sauce is, if it's cunning or if it's other things that they have going, but those things need to generally be incorporated into all commanders, so that more commanders behave a little bit better. I know that there's the concern that it would be ahistorical, all right, and that the gap between good commanders and bad commanders, which is really important historically, would be lost. It would be lost a little bit, but commanders still matter for a whole bunch of different things. And I'd be willing, in this case, to trade some immersion, and I would look to get it back in other places by, making production matter, making the Navy matter, making the economy matter, right? There are ways to get immersion back, and I would trade a little bit for a better tactical AI. On the attack, the AI still has to get together and push reasonably well together. And on the defensive, they have got to recognize when they're being flanked, and they have to react before they're under fire. So whatever stats need to be tweaked, I would support jacking those up and make it across the board. So if, as the human player, I turn it over to my AI, they should be able to do it reasonably well. I I think it's worth the cost of, commanders weren't all this good, blah blah blah. All right, that's fine, but we need some sort of tactical challenge to keep it interesting. And there are still ways that good commanders are going to spill over into better troops, and they already have that in the game, and so that part of it can be kept. And true to form, and at long last, that's it. That's not everything I think that could be done to make GTCW the ACW game of all time. But I think that those are some of the biggest obstacles to it being kept that way. And it's too bad to see that, 3.5 years out of early access release, we still have folks who want to like the game. They've bought the game, and they just uninstall it because, they've spent time in it, and they just give up on the game because there's too much that is maddeningly broke that could be fixed. And I think if it was fixed, it would put the devs on an excellent track for whatever the next release title is. And I think a number of folks, I think more than not, will probably get whatever the next title is, but there are more than one that won't, because it's not so much the stuff I'm worried about. I haven't even talked about bugs in this video, really. But there is that whole issue with GTCW. I've come out well in the bug lottery, as you've heard me say, but others not so much, or there's things in the game that I just ignore, and so it's not an issue for me. But yeah, it'd be nice if somebody, and more likely than not, probably take an interested modder or modding team who would have the capacity to do this kind of stuff to make this game the game it deserves to be.